Hey, Lev, great to have you here. The stage is yours.
Nice to be here. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, so this is session 1 of 3, where we talk about webinar strategy. And this first session, we'll talk about how to attract and build a loyal webinar audience. Session number 2, which will follow straight on from this one, we'll look at how we can control the audience journey, the content or buyer journey through webinars. And then in the third session, we'll look at how to gain webinar success at scale. So when you start looking at webinars, in terms of numbers beyond 30, 40, 50 into the hundreds. We'll start with the how to attract and build a loyal webinar audience. It's one of the most commonly asked questions that we get, especially from companies perhaps who are new to running webinars, perhaps companies who don't have a large marketable database or a big following online, but who still have a lot of relevant things to talk about and obviously show to their audience. So the session, despite obviously being a live strategy session, we will get very tactical. We will look at some really tactical steps that will inform your strategy on this topic. And then we will summarize that so you can actually begin strategizing around how to make this work for you. So the first point that we'll get to, unfortunately, is the bad news. Without a webinar audience, there is no webinar. As simple as that. There is a webinar, obviously, because you spend a lot of time on preparing it, on researching the topic, on presenting and doing everything around it. But you perhaps didn't achieve any webinar attendees, maybe only very few. And that ultimately is, to some degree, a waste of time for what you're doing, because you didn't achieve what you wanted to set out. Unfortunately, there's more bad news. The bad news number 2 is there is no magic wand to solve this problem. There's no silver bullet, no quick fix to make this work. So that's why we will go very tactical in this session. But there's also a great opportunity. The opportunity is, and this is the good news, is that you have the ability to create a lot of mind share and ultimately market share with great quality output. And that's at the basis of what we're going to talk about. As we go through this now, this is not prettiest of slides, but hopefully it'll be a really helpful slide. And it's where we go really tactical into the strategy. So we've broken this up into 2 talking points. One is the attracting the audience. The second part is then to build the loyalty and build the audience around that. So the first point under attracting your audience, and all of these points will build up together with the second column that we have here as well, is be relevant and be opportunistic. So you may want to talk about certain aspects of what you're offering, what your product can do, what your solution can do, but ultimately it has to be relevant and has to be something that the audience will want to hear about. It's something that adds value to their day, that helps them solve problems rather than purely what you want them to know about. It's this kind of push versus pull. And that gives you also the opportunity to be opportunistic. COVID-19 is a great example where companies shifted their focus, pivoted towards showing how their service offering, their products are helping their customers in the current situation. So making the content they already have even more relevant by looking at what is going on in the marketplace and how is that affecting the customers. So first point is be relevant, be opportunistic around how you present your content and in what way. The second point then is seek collaborations, and we're talking about attracting an audience. And if you don't have a big database, seeking collaborations with others will help you extend that reach that you have. It will extend how you present yourself to a wider audience that you may normally not have access to. So that could be an example of very simply an industry expert or a partner company, even all the way through to maybe a paid media partnership as well, but really we want to look at how can you do this without spending a huge amount of money, and this is collaborating with others, speakers, customers, partners, and so on, to also tap into their database, into their reach that they have. And when you do these collaborations, that's one of the core items you'll want to focus on, so that they will also co-promote your webinars. The third point then is to get industry specific. And we see this a lot when customers have a lot to talk about and they try and please everyone with the content. And that's great. There's always very great content available. But if you think about your audience, what is relevant to them is something that applies to their industry. So you may be offering a product or a solution that applies to the financial services industry. It might be the IT industry, manufacturing, whatever it might be. But there may be multiple use cases. And by making your content industry specific, you will be much more relevant, coming back to the first point, to your audience. And ultimately, that will mean that you will be much more likely to attract that audience to register and attend your webinars as well. If you keep it too generic, there will be somebody else who will do the work differently or better than you, and will be industry specific, and it's likely then that mind share, the registrations that you would have otherwise attracted might go to them. And then you have the ability to run webinar series. So you may be running, you may have a very big topic to talk about, and you can break that down, maybe even in combination with the industry-specific approach as well. So break down the big topic into a series of 3, 5, 10 webinars that over time you can actually get much deeper into the content, talk about it in much more detail, which again makes it more relevant to your audience, and ultimately then more likely that they will sign up for that and actually attend as well. And the series aspect then also brings another way of benefiting from those attended the first part, because if they like that, they were more likely to join the second part as well. You can actually say in the first webinar, well, we have the second part coming up in 2-3 weeks' time. Join us for that one as well. We have a link here available for you to register on, and port that audience across into the second webinar, the second piece, and so on, third piece, fourth piece, and so on. And that saves you a job, certainly for those who are already registered, to try and promote to them again by email and compete with other emails they may be getting. The fifth point then is diversify into languages. We see this a lot where webinar content is put out in English because the assumption is everybody speaks English and certainly would understand English. And that may or may not always be true, but the point here is that often other languages are underserved. So we think about international businesses maybe underserving Spanish, Italian, German, French, webinar content in those languages. And what we see when those companies who adopt this approach and creating webinar content in language, that you may not get as big a sign-up rate because the overall target audience is smaller, but the conversion rate from registrant to attendee is much, much higher. Where you have an industry average perhaps of around 40% converting from registrant to attendee, you will now see 60, 70% converting because that language is underserved. Now you're serving it up in that local language, and that is appreciated by the audience, and actually you'll attract them to sign up for your webinars that way as well. The point 6 then is put sales and account executives to work. You will have marketing automation, sending out emails, and email is still the most productive way of promoting your webinars and getting registrations. But ultimately, the real relationships with prospects and customers are held in sales teams, in account executive teams. And those relationships are probably the most relevant to you as well. So you want to attract those audience members, those people to your webinars. So create small kits with an invite, with relevant information, perhaps with supporting documentation to say, well, sales teams, account executive teams, you guys need to reach out as well and bring in more registrations for us in parallel to the marketing automation that you have already running. And then you can take that one step higher and actually approach your company executives as well on a peer-to-peer basis for them perhaps to share either directly with their peers in the industry. Say, we've got this great webinar series coming up. We think it's relevant for your teams. Please do share it if you think it's relevant, or simply post it on social media. And account executives often followed by a lot of people, company executives, I should say, followed by a lot of people online on social. And when they post something, people tend to listen to that, look at it. So get buy-in from them to also share the news about upcoming webinar series and so on. And it's ultimately in the entire company's interest. So hopefully it'll be in their interest as well. Okay, so that's the attract an audience side. We now look at the build loyalty and build the webinar audience over time. And really the first point here is consistency, and consistency in everything. The audience will appreciate consistency in your webinars. And by this consistency, we mean content quality consistency, video consistency, audio consistency, format consistency, perhaps the consistency of who is the moderator, a familiar face. And that doesn't mean that you can't innovate, you can't evolve over time just because you have to stay consistent. You can still do that. But what you put out has to be consistent because it becomes recognizable, it becomes effectively an extension of your brand. And if it's inconsistent, then you will perhaps see, for example, let's say the first webinar you run as a video webinar. The second one, for some reason, has to be an audio webinar. The quality isn't as consistent. The content is different. That is not great for an audience experience. So always aim for consistency in everything you do. Then you need to create quality content, and we spoke about this before. If the content, you can attract an audience with clever marketing, with great subject lines, with with snazzy titles, and they'll register. But then, will they come back? And this is all about loyal audience. Will they come back if the content wasn't good enough? If it's at odds with what you've promoted, likelihood is they may give you the benefit of that once, and they'll come back a second time. But really, over time, you will not build an audience if the quality isn't good in your content. The third point then is, and this coincides with the quality content, is great storytelling. And that can apply to either an individual webinar, or it can be across a webinar series or an entire webinar program where you tell an overarching story. It has to be something that the audience can visualize and something that they will understand and see, okay, beyond the topic itself, there's a greater story here. There's a greater purpose of what we're listening to. And that will help you, again, bring back that audience for more webinars over time. The fourth point then is to get really hands-on and practical with your content. You will have a lot of theory to talk about. There will be a lot of product information or solution information, for example. But ultimately, the audience is there to see, how does this help me practically? How does it work? How could I use it? What does it look like? You can visualize all of this because you are the expert in the field. But the audience is new to this potentially. So if you want them to come back, you need to really show them practically what you're talking about. And that is through live demos, that could be through video clips, things like that. But ultimately, the more hands-on, the more practical you get, the more likelihood you have that the audience will come back and say, remember last time the webinar showed a great video, showed a great demo, I want more of that. And you hook them in with those kind of pieces of interaction. And then obviously you need to focus on great audio and video quality. The content can be as good as it can be, but if they can barely understand the speaker, if it's too echoey, too pixelated on the video, it becomes really difficult to listen to consume. And they may say, well, this was great content, but it's just too hard to listen to. I just can't. My eyes start hurting. I can't do it. So if you really want to attract an audience over time and build them and coming back, you really need to focus on good audio and good video as well. And then we have this approach, I suppose, of DIY versus using experts, external or internal experts, really. And at this point is really about speed to scale, speed to loyalty. It's a perfectly valid approach to try and do everything yourself. And you can do test and try things out and evolve over time. But that does take time. You can only evolve as quickly as the number of webinars that you run, because each time you test something new, you need a new webinar to do that. And the audience probably doesn't take very kindly to testing live. So you will want to make sure that if something really does work live, that it's been done before. And you may have somebody on your team, you may have somebody in the company that's done it before that can advise you on it. Or maybe you have to go externally through your webinar platform, for example, and say, how do we do this best? How can we achieve something that will attract that audience to come back and back again? And simple aspects of, around slides, around how to do the video and around how to do the audio and all those kind of things. It may be a faster approach to use somebody who's done it before. And then use a great webinar platform. There are many webinar platforms available, but not all of them will do what you need it to do. What you're trying to achieve with your webinars, you need to make sure that you have a platform that can accomplish that. And I'm sure everybody listening here will be ambitious with what you want to do, how you want to present those webinars, and you're just going to make sure that the webinar platform is up to scratch.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
And then we have this point of capitalizing on demand. So we really want to have a look at, you need to capitalize on the on-demand session where you, often companies will run live webinars and they will stop when it's finished. And you're leaving a huge amount of attendees on the table potentially. What we see often is that for every 100 live attendees you get, is that you actually have another 75, 80 potentially on demand if you promote it well, that will consume your content on demand through posting on social media, on your website, through lead nurturing programs and so on. So keep that in mind, create a good on-demand strategy as well, and then get personal in your follow-up and in your invites. I don't just mean DLEV, that's easy. What I'm talking about is, if you look at webinar series, for example, if somebody's attended part 1 and part 2, send them a separate email and say, hey, Lev, we saw you attended a few of the sessions in the series. We've got another one coming up. We think you might be interested in that. That speaks to me entirely differently than just a mass email saying, this is the abstract, this is the title, please attend. So to get personal in that approach as well. And then use surveys and act on trends from those surveys. You need to ask your attendees, what did you like? What else are you interested in? What did you dislike? And ask those honest questions and get some honest answers, because that will help you evolve and build your program. And ultimately, there will be trends that you can see either within a survey from one webinar or across multiple webinars. And you will never be able to please everyone, and everybody will always have something that they didn't like or did like, and that may be individual opinions. But look at what the trends are from multiple people answering the same thing. And then ultimately aim for excellence, and we are big proponents of that. If you aim for excellence, you will always evolve, you will always innovate, you will always create a better experience for your audience, and ultimately that will mean you attract more of the right audience, create more loyalty, to the point that we created the Webinar Excellence Manifesto. So search for that online if you'd like to see it. It's freely available. You don't need to register. We won't spam you with anything, but it's 82 principles freely available that cover the entire webinar process from start to finish, and how you can aim for excellence in those. And there may be items in there that you are already excellent at. There may be others in there that you've never even considered. But whatever you do and however you approach it, I think we all owe it to our audience to be excellent in it, so they get what they want in the most valuable way, in the right format that they can consume most easily, and that ultimately builds loyalty. And that's it from me. So hopefully all those things together, tactical items, will inform your strategy around how you can build your webinar audience, how you can keep them coming back, and how you can attract somebody who's relevant and who wants to know more about you, and who will join you on that journey across your different webinars.
All right, Lev, I love that. Lots of great info, and you're not done yet. I think we're going to have another session here in a minute, but I want to jump in some questions. I loved your concept of building those repeatable webinars. I also love thinking about how mature a lead is. If someone's attending multiple webinars, the level of maturity of that lead is far greater than someone that's doing a drive-by webinar. So I love all the questions. Keep the chat firing away here during these sessions. I'm gonna jump in a question from Tom. Would you say webinars carry more weight than a live stream? And what would be your strategic pros and cons for doing one or the other?
Good question. So maybe just to define a webinar, interactive elements that you can engage as an audience member with the speakers, with live stream purely, a sort of something that's streamed on YouTube perhaps. So webinars will always be more engaging because there's more tools around it to engage with the audience and for the audience to engage with you. If you want that conversation, if you want that two-way interaction, even though it is a one-to-many scenario, webinars are a great tool. And live streams have their place as well, but they typically will be more informative. It's a one-way street. It becomes a little bit more difficult to interact and really have that conversation going. And ultimately, we have to remember all the questions that are being asked, the surveys that are being answered, all that information flows into probably your CRM, and that informs your sales teams, your account management teams, and so on. And they can have richer conversations from that interactivity because they build up a better picture of who's actually on the webinar and what is their level of interest, what is their maturity level, and so on. So that's really, when we talk about marketing, lead generation, that's probably more appropriate. But you may reach with a live stream an audience that you wouldn't otherwise have reached, because people consume things in different ways. But make sure if you do a live stream and you do want that interactivity, that you always point back to where people can attend that interactive webinar as well.
I love that. And the live video space, that was the agency that I built. I've helped launch a lot of Fortune 500 brands on a live video, and I couldn't agree more. I always say live video is great for access and inspiration, and webinars are great for insight, education, and it's all about that data. And if you're focused on that data within a webinar, you can really find value and use webinar to bring people in through that access. So I love that insight. And the second question we have here from Michelle, we've been incorporating panel discussions into our 1-hour webinars. Any tips, the most engaging way to include a panel when the panel members are based around the world?
So panels they can go incredibly well or they can go incredibly wrong, and you only get one shot at it. And what we always say with panel discussions is plan them well, and almost script them in the way they run without them sounding scripted. So you'll want to know what questions are there that you're going to put to which panel member at what point in time. Especially online, you can't have, it's not as easy. Well, it's easier for people to talk over each other because they don't get quite the visual cues that if you're sat together on the stage. So you need to be really, the moderator needs to be right on cue on who's going to answer what question at what time, but also allow for sort of deep dive follow-up questions. So ask the simple question first, address it to speaker 1, ask speaker 2 actively, what is your opinion on this? Maybe not 3 and 4 all the time, because if it's a bigger panel, you just get into repetitive mode. But then also plan a follow-up question, so you can dig deeper into it. That way it stays more interactive, a bit more easy to listen to. You break up the conversation a bit more. And planning that in advance, that everybody knows what other questions, when am I going to be asked, what do I need to prepare for so my answers are good, is a completely different scenario than if you're doing it physically on a stage, for example, where you can see visual cues and somebody wants to say something. Online, that's a bit more difficult, so you need to plan that a lot more in advance. And that way you'll get a lot more value out of that. Now, one point to add to that, if you are inviting live questions as well, always have a plan for pre-prepared questions. And then if you do invite live questions, clarify with the panelists beforehand, what is it they want to answer? What are they comfortable speaking on a live stream ad hoc? Last thing you want to do is put them on the spot, physically or online. So if you do get live questions, just make sure in advance what topic areas they're comfortable answering live.
Love that. Great insights there for sure. I mean, I think they're so great. I think we need session number 2 from you.
It's coming up straight away.